Welcome to episode 122 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories their way and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50 and your host for today's show. After more than 3 decades working in manufacturing leadership positions, Mark Cundiff discovered that one of his greatest passions wasn't just about improving operations or boosting profits, it was about developing people. In this episode, Mark shares how a leadership lesson from a John Maxwell book ignited a lifelong journey of growth and mentorship. Now in his 60s, Mark is investing his time and energy into helping others become better leaders through coaching, speaking, and writing. If you've ever wondered how to make your future bigger than your past, then this conversation is for you. To tell us what gives his life more meaning and purpose in his 60s, please welcome Mark Cundiff to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Mark. It's a pleasure to talk to you. How did you get so interested in leadership development?
It all started about 20-some years ago, about 26, 27 years ago. I was in sales. I started with this company and did sales for them for about 8 years. And what happens a lot of times in sales is you do good in sales and then they promote you to management. But they do that without really any training. And so I picked up John Maxwell's book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And that really started me down the path of trying to develop a growth mindset. And I'd had some other mentors in my life that had put some books in front of me from the road of personal development. And so I started with that book, and that really helped give me some clues, because when you're in sales, a lot of times people in the plant, there's a small plant that I started out with about 30 people. You just think, the boss goes out there and you tell them what to do and they do it. When you actually become the leader of the organization, you realize it doesn't really work that straightforward. And when you're in your 20s, you're a little naive and think, okay, I've got the title of plant manager. They're going to do what I ask them to do. Then you have to realize that you have to try to move from positional leadership to leading with influence and relationships. And so that's what John Maxwell taught me. And that began me down this journey of really studying leadership. And as I mentioned to you before the call, I average reading about a book a week. That's just something I've been doing throughout my career, probably for the last 3 decades. And what that has helped me do is get a better understanding of the things that I need to do to have better relationships with people inside and outside of work. It doesn't really matter. You know, what John Maxwell says about leadership, he says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so you think about that, everyone has a role in leadership. Whether it's with your kids, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with your neighbor, whether it's somebody at your church, we all influence. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, but it's a matter of how you steward that influence and how you steward that leadership that really matters. And so that began me down the path of studying leadership, and I saw the fruits of that, and I never stopped. I realized that there was always more that I needed to learn, and then other mentors came into my life. I went from that job running a relatively small plant to running the largest plant in that organization, and went from around 30 people to probably 150 people. So that takes a whole different type of leadership, because at that point you have to work through people more. So I had 10 direct reports. So my leadership had to go up another notch. I had to learn how to lead leaders, so to speak, and develop leaders. And so again, I was digging into other types of leadership books and going to courses and taking curriculums. And back when you had cassettes, I used to listen to cassettes in my car when I was traveling, and then it went to CDs, and now we listen to it on our phones. So it's always a university on wheels, if you will, just trying to learn and gain more insight.
I like what you said about how people who are good at their jobs are often promoted into management. And just being good at your job does not automatically make somebody a good manager. We see that happen a lot. People are promoted to their level of incompetence, right? So they're really good at selling, but they are not good at leading a team of salespeople. So they have to be developed in that. And if the companies aren't developing these people, that can have disastrous impact.
That's correct. It's one of my pet peeves. You see a lot of organizations, whether it's promoting somebody from sales or promoting somebody from the shop floor into a supervisory role, and they do it without equipping them, without training them, without mentoring them, without coaching them. And then what happens a lot of times, which is really sad, is that they end up firing that person.
Yes.
They promote them to failure, and really it's the organization's fault, but that they throw these people out in the ocean without a life raft and expect them to sink or swim. And many of them sink, and it causes, like you said, disastrous consequences for the organization.
Right. And for the people involved, because then they don't realize their full potential. And they never will, they might say, I'm never going to do that again, when in fact they would have been really good leaders had somebody been able to mentor them, encourage them, and walk them through those first awkward years.
That's correct. And I think that's what it's all about. And that's where I'm at in the stage of my life right now, where I've done that, a lot of mentoring and coaching and developing, taking people from the shop floor and seeing them go rise all the way through the ranks, running plants and even more. And as I'm now just turned 60, my goal now is to really try to help those leaders that need it. And you have some leaders that have been in it a long time. Sometimes somebody has 20 years of experience, but it's not really developed them. It's 20 years of the same experience, not 20 years of progressive experience where they're growing and developing and become a strong leader. And so what I like to do is try to find leaders that are stuck like that or feel like they're living in a reactive world. I've got a survey on my website. It's called a drift detector. And that drift detector has 7 questions that goes in there, and it really tries to help you identify whether or not you're just going through the motion. Have you ever gotten a situation where you feel like you're walking in quicksand, or you got so much going on that you're just reacting and you never have time for a proactive, thought out, practiced steps to enact in your organization? And if you're just reacting all the time, then you're going to make a lot of bad decisions. We're all going to make some decisions that don't go right. But if you're always reacting, you're going to make some bad decisions because you're rushing. And we used to do some surveys in organizations, and we focused on going into organizations that they were maintaining equipment for the plant. And what would happen is we'd go into those organizations and it was like a fire drill. And who got rewarded in that type of situation? The maintenance guy that was the fireman, always going and putting out the fire, and he was the hero because he got the equipment back up and running. You know who didn't get rewarded? The guy who was Smokey the Bear, the guy who was preventing those breakdowns, the guy who was their equipment running. And so a lot of leaders are firemen, and very few of them are Smokey the Bears, because the Smokey the Bears are quiet, unassuming. They're methodically getting things done because they're thinking it through, putting proactive steps into place. So a lot of leaders need to move in order to go from good to a great leader, is to learn how to move out of the reactive into the proactive type of lifestyle and workspace.
I love that idea of a firefighter versus Smokey the Bear, because you're absolutely right. The people who do their jobs well to ensure that things are always moving smoothly are rarely rewarded. But it's those folks who let things fall and then build them up or react to get it back to working. They're seen as the saviors. And that's an interesting concept. I'm glad you brought that up. Were you ever in the military? No?
Never was in the military.
That's the only kind of business or organization where positional leadership seems to work, where you have to follow the orders of the boss. But it seems as though employees have changed so much, even in my lifetime, that when the boss says something, you do it. Doesn't work as well today as it did maybe 40 years ago.
Yeah, and I think the military, you got to look at that. That's a different type of environment where it's a life and death type environment. You have to take emotion out of the situation. And it's a different world altogether. Now, some of the military practices can work in the real world as far as structure and organization. And one of the great things that the military does, they're really good about planning.
Yes.
They're going to do an op, they plan it. And another thing they really do is review how that op went. So they've got some very good practices that you can bring into your personal world, your business world, your nonprofit world. But like you said, the world that we live in today, it's so much more relational, and that's the way it should be. A guy I studied from a number of years ago, Aubrey Daniels, he's still alive, but I think he's up in his 90s now, but he wrote a book called Bringing Out the Best in People, and it's all about positive reinforcement. And he does it from a very scientific standpoint. He was a behavioral psychologist, worked in prisons and worked in mental institutions. And before he got into the business world, spent 4 or 5 decades helping organizations improve their leadership. And what he teaches in there is that a positional type leader, a directive type leader can get people up to compliance, but you'll never get discretionary effort out of them. And where the real money in an organization is in, if you hit that line of compliance, is getting people to go over that compliance level and give you discretionary effort. And so what'll happen a lot of times, a lot of organizations spend all their time, energy, just beating people to get them up to compliance.
Right.
Instead of learning how to use positive reinforcement, bring people along with relationships, bring people along with clear expectations, good feedback, having a culture of accountability, and rewarding people doing the right behaviors, not concentrating so much on the outcome, focusing on the behaviors that get you the outcomes that you want.
I remember a study a number of years ago that I thought was just fascinating, where they looked at organizations, where they looked at the level of employees, and they might have been like 5 or 6, and they wanted to bring them up to an 8. So they invested a lot of money, effort, resources, raises, bonuses, etc., to do that, to bring them up. For a while, they were able to elevate that a little bit. But what they did next was focused on that same resources on the 8s and 9s and made them 10s, and had just tripled, if not quadrupled, the results by focusing on the achievers rather than trying to bring everybody up to mediocre.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. And John Maxwell and some other leaders, Henry Cloud, some of those guys in the leadership space, they talk about that, is that we spend a lot of our energy. A lot of times we talk about managing our time, but if you really look at it, managing your energy really is something that you should focus on, because you only have so much energy during the day. And like you're saying, what happens to a lot of leaders is the bad performers suck the energy and suck the life out of them, and they let the good performers go, and they don't put gasoline on their fire and keep them going at a higher level. Whereas if you look at that 80-20 rule, so to speak, if you spend 80% of your time on your top 20% of performers, your organization is going to really multiply and do really well. But if you spend 80% of your time on the bottom 20%, then you're not going to get very much return on investment for your time and energy. And so that's a great point that you made there, Greg.
I agree, because the Eagles sense that's going to be a problem, that they're not being developed, because the Eagles are good at what they want and they want to get better. And if the company isn't going to be investing in them to help them get better, the Eagles sense that and they'll leave for greater pastures, leaving you with the turkeys.
Yeah, I was reading Jim Collins' book, B 2.0. It's a book that he put out in 2020. Most people know him from the Good to Great book that he wrote, that is so famous for. But this book goes, and it's concentrated toward entrepreneurs. And he gets into that where he talks about good and good, great, first who, then what. And he talks about in this book that if you do not take care of your top performers, they're going to leave. That's one thing. The other thing is, if you do not address the poor performers, your top performers are going to leave.
Correct.
Because it drags them down. They see that there's not a culture of accountability. It breaks down trust in the leadership. And so what happens is those people move on and they go somewhere else to where the culture is rewarding top performers and addressing the poor performers. So one of the things, a lot of times people feel like they're being compassionate by not firing somebody or disciplining somebody. But Jack Welch was often criticized for being harsh. But one of the things I love, I heard him speak one day at a conference, and he said, the most compassionate thing that we can do for our team members is give them candid feedback. Worst thing you can do is not let somebody know where they stand. If they are not performing, you need to hold them accountable, let them know what the expectations are, and give them a path to work out of that. And then it's up to them. Are they going to make the choice to work out of that situation and perform at a higher level, or do they need to go work in somebody else's organization? Candid feedback, giving good feedback, is a responsibility of a leader. Many leaders don't have the courage to do that. And I have worked for a couple leaders that throughout my career that were very passive aggressive. They would not come and have a direct conversation with you about A, B, and C. And then one was even worse in that he would send out these broadcast emails to the whole organization because of one person's bad performance. And everybody's sitting there looking over their shoulders. Did I do something wrong? And it causes all this confusion. It causes a lot of wasted energy where people try to chase down to find out what's going on. And then the person who's really needing to be addressed is not being addressed. And so all that confusion leaves the performer that needs to be addressed getting umbrella from the shrapnel that he needs to be actually taking on. And so a lot of leaders cause a lot more problems for themselves because they're not courageous, don't do candid feedback, and try passive aggressive behaviors.
You have quoted a number of books already in this conversation, and your book case behind you shows dozens and dozens of books. Leaders are readers, and it appears that you have adopted that principle. Have you read all those books?
Yes, I've spent, like I had mentioned to you, I average reading about a book a week, and I handle that in a number of different ways. And this is something that your listeners might want to adapt some of these things that I do. A friend of mine got me turned on to Audible probably 20 some years ago. And what I started doing with Audible is I did a lot of traveling at that time in airplanes, different things. And so I started listening to books. And sometimes when I was doing a lot of traveling, I could do 3 or 4 books a week, just depending on how many hours I was on a plane or whatever. But what I'll do a lot of times is I'll take Audible and I'll listen to a book. And if it's something that really strikes me and I really want to study, then I'll get that hard copy and study it. I might not read the whole thing all the way through, but I'll go in and pull out key sections that really hit me. So that's one way a leader can. A lot of leaders are really busy and they don't have time to just sit down and read a book. But there's multiple different ways that you can consume content of a book. One of the things I do on my blog is I do a lot of book summaries on my blog. And that's at markjcundiff.com if you're interested. And I have a newsletter that I put out every week with something that you can read in 5 to 7 minutes that gives you some tidbits from books and podcasts that I'll listen to. So that's one way that leaders can consume books and read them. Another thing is you can read some book summaries. Good companies to do that. Get Abstract is a good one. SoundView book summaries. Those are companies that take books and summarize them. And so I'll even read a book and I'll go back and read the book summary just to refresh my memory about what I've read. Or sometimes I'll read the book summary to see if I want to read that book. And then I'll use that as kind of a study guide to read through the book. So there's a number of different ways to try to consume content. And those are some of the things I do to try to help me better understand and put some of those things into practice.
And you also found a good way to buy books rather cheaply.
Oh, yes. If you're not familiar with buying books on eBay, I highly recommend it, especially books that have been around a while. Just How to Win Friends and Influence People, and a lot of Ken Blanchard's books, Dr. John Maxwell's books. Some of the older ones you can get for $3 or $4. And if you go to Second Sale on eBay, every 4th book is free. So if you go there and you buy 4 books for, they say $4 to make it simple, it's going to cost you $12 plus tax and free shipping. So you can get 4 books for less than what you would buy one. And many of these are best-selling books that you can get on eBay for very inexpensive. So it's very budget friendly, and it just really gives you an opportunity to consume a lot of content for a very low cost.
Are there books that you would recommend people over 50 read every year to keep their skills sharp?
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a book I wanted to mention, because I think that this book right here, The Laws of Lifetime Growth, I just picked it up. I'll show you on the screen there. And I love the subtitle because I think it applies to your audience. It says, always make your future bigger than your past. And I wrote a blog post on this, and I go through all 10 laws. There's 10 laws that he goes through, but I love that first law, and that's the subtitle of the book. Because what he's trying to help people to do is reframe, no matter where you are in your life. You can be in your 20s, and that applies to you. Maybe you had a great high school career. Maybe you were a star athlete, and sometimes people get stuck there. And then somebody goes through their 20s, and maybe they start off in their career, and they're just high-performing salesman or a high performer in their job. And then they start resting on their laurels, and they stop looking forward and stop looking for the next thing. But you look at age group, you're talking about an audience of 50 and over. Always make your future bigger than your past. A lot of times when we get to this age in life, we look back on our successes. Maybe we had success raising our children. Maybe we've had success running a business. Maybe we've had success running a nonprofit. Maybe there's a pastor out there that's had a great success growing and building a church. Maybe there's someone that's done some other thing, invented some things. And it's easy to look back on those, and you should celebrate those. But what are you going to do next? What is next for you to move forward in your life and career? And it's interesting. I've listened to a number of your episodes on your podcast, and I heard an engineer the other day who's now twisting balloons in RV parks. And you never would think a guy working for GE, creating some cutting edge equipment that detects cancer, is now twisting balloons. But and he also referees pickleball games. And so you listen to that and think, okay, man, this guy has created a new excitement, something that gives him energy. And you could tell when you listen to that gentleman on the call that he was very excited about what he was doing. So he's making his future bigger than his past. He was a very accomplished engineer for GE. And they called him back 4 or 5 different times, if I remember correctly, because he was so well respected and his knowledge and expertise coveted there that they didn't want to ever let this guy go. And they even tried to bring him back again. And he's finally, I think, pushed him away for the last time. But so think about, how does that apply in your life? Maybe you've went through a really difficult challenge. Maybe you've had a health issue. Maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you, like me, you've gotten laid off in your career and you're having to make a pivot. Think about that. Reframe your future about making that future bigger than the past. And I think that'll really change. So I would recommend reading that book. Another book, What to Do Next, is a good book. I think that's by Jeff Henderson. That's also talking about people that are going through a pivot, maybe whether it's a career. He was a pastor of a church. He has had a number of different careers, and he realized that he had started this church. He worked in Andy Stanley's organization, and he started a church, one of their local campuses, and he realized it was time for him to go do something next. And when he left that position, he didn't know what he was going to do next. And he talks about the process, about your network, having good relationships with your network, talking to them about what you want to do next, trying to get feedback from your network, thinking through what is it that lights your fire. So that's a really good book for people that are in this stage of life where they're thinking about a little bit of confusion, maybe a little bit of not being sure of what to do next. And there's another book that Craig Rochelle recommended. It's very much on the spiritual side of things. And I think the title of it's From Strength to Strength. It's all about that same thing, about going through the latter stages of life and thinking about, okay, you've hit this pinnacle in your life. Maybe you were known as an engineer. Maybe you were known as a great salesman, but then that part of your life is over. And a lot of times your identity is tied to that. And he talks about, how do you transition to a new identity?
That's a very good point.
And so I went through that at an early age. When I was 19, I sat in a neurologist's office and he told me I could no longer play football. I had 7 concussions in 6 years.
Wow.
And back then, concussions were not understood like they were. But fortunately, I was sitting in the Brummel Gray Medical Hospital of Wake Forest, and this guy knew his stuff. And he ended my career, which I thought was devastating. And I was known through all my high school days and so forth. I was a football player. And that's who Mark Cundiff was. He was an athlete, played basketball, played different sports. And so I had to make a pivot even at an early age. And so maybe someone in your audience is in that situation today. You need to make a pivot and you got to work through that. I would suggest picking up some books and getting around a network of friends in your community, whether it's in your church or whether it's just friends that you have, and working through that and becoming excited, just like Dan Sullivan says, about your future more than your past.
Very good point. I love Audible. It allows me to read a bunch of books while I'm driving and the speed a little bit so I can just read more books faster. The problem I've had is I've read a bunch of books and said, I have got to study this again and go in and take notes and highlight some things. So I wound up buying the regular book and the Audible book. Do you have a system for highlighting and refreshing your memory as to what you've read so that you can apply it?
I've went through a lot of different contortions over the years trying to get good at that. And I will tell you, I'm a new proponent of using AI. There's a trick I learned just in the last 2 weeks, Greg. I've got notebooks upon notebooks from conferences and book notes and so forth that I've taken, and you probably do as well as the learner that you are. What you can do with ChatGPT, you can take your phone and get the phone app, and you can take a picture of that, and it'll transcribe it. And I'll just share a story that a lady who went to a conference out in San Diego a few weeks ago, she went to 14 different breakout sessions, and she took her notes, took pictures of them with her phone, had ChatGPT summarize them and organize them for her, and asked ChatGPT to give her one action item for each of those 14 sections that she could implement over the next 2 months. And it took something that in the past she would have probably set on her shelf and maybe referred to a few things. So what I'm starting to do now is use ChatGPT in that way, taking pictures of my notes, taking summaries that I've had and getting them broken down into smaller pieces with the key points. It's truly amazing. I'm actually going to, it's on my agenda to start a course for people who've never used ChatGPT or any AI to help them understand a little bit about these type of things. And that's something I'll be putting out in my newsletter once I get that up. But it's a great way, Greg, for you to take your content that you've accumulated over the years. And even you can take like a page of a book. Maybe there's a particular section that you really like. You can take a picture of it and say, hey, can you summarize this for me? And it'll help you capture that in content.
That's a great idea, Mark. I had never thought of doing that. My problem is that my handwriting looks like somewhere between second grade and third grade. And I don't know if ChatGPT would ever be able to look at that and make any sense.
Well, let me tell you something. When this lady told me this tip, I heard it on LinkedIn. It's a lady I follow. And I said, I'm going to give that a try. So I went and tested it on a list. I had a list of 90 things that I had on the to-do list. And I took pictures of it and it nailed it.
Really?
My mom can't even I can't even read my writing sometimes. I'll have to go back and think of the context of where I wrote that. It was truly incredible how well it transcribed what I had written.
I'm going to try that. Absolutely. What prompted you to go out on your own to do leadership development?
It's been an itch that I've wanted to scratch for a number of years, and I've dabbled in it and blogged for a few years, and I've done a lot of just coaching friends and people in the church. I've done a lot over the years, the churches that I've been active in. I just built relationships with a lot of the people on staff, and I've done just a lot of coaching and counseling, and people will call me up. And I said, this is an opportunity for me to take and give back to the community at large, so to speak, and do something where I built up this reservoir of content and knowledge, both from reading the book. I've got 35 years of experience working in industrial manufacturing. And so I put these things into practice in the real world. And I've been successful at times and I've failed at times and seen what works and what doesn't work. I've seen the challenges that leaders face. I've been on the front lines running a plant. The largest plant I ran was over 600 people in the middle of COVID. And you talking about a fire drill, that was a fire drill on steroids. And I started in that job on March of 2020. That was my first day, in the 1st of March. And then like in 3 weeks, the whole world went crazy. And so I not only was trying to take and turn over a plant that was underperforming, but I was having to deal with this world phenomenon that nobody knew what to do with. And so that really tests a lot of your leadership mettle. And so I think those are things that I can do to be a sounding board for leaders, to help them talk through situations, for a really good listener when it comes to people trying to talk through different situations. So I think those are some of the strengths that give me the ability to help a leader move from being just a good leader to being a great leader.
How do you find your clients?
It's really just through referrals and through just my network from LinkedIn and that type of situation. And just from people I've known over the years that I've done business with and that type of thing. And I'm really starting to try to branch out. As I mentioned to you prior to the call, I'm going to start a YouTube channel, just try to get my name and face out there. Going to start a podcast eventually, trying to do some online courses to give people a taste of what it's like to hear me and to work with me. So those are the type of things that I'm doing to attract clients. And then now I'm guesting on a podcast. So hopefully maybe there's someone in the earshot of your community that maybe needs somebody to help them through something or point them in the right direction or just listen to them as they're walking through something. Those are the type of things that I like to do. Another thing that I'm going to branch out into is also maybe being like a fractional CEO or VP of ops or that kind of something where maybe it's a smaller business. They can't hire an operations manager, but what I could do is come in and work part-time for them, giving them some guidance, helping them structure their organization, especially a lot of younger companies that maybe don't have a good understanding of how to structure the organization. What are the things that they need to have in place to be effective? So I'm going to do that type of consulting as well as those opportunities come up.
Those are great opportunities for people like you, I think, that can take an organization from point A to point B. And then once they're at point B, they can settle for a while and get used to that and then decide to go to point C. But after you've done your job, you go off and help somebody else. And everybody benefits through that kind of thing. What's the ideal client look like for you?
I'll tell you, my biggest filter is got to have a growth mindset.
Yes.
If you don't want to learn and grow, then I'm not going to get along with you very well because that's what I'm all about. And so it's going to be somebody that has a growth mindset that wants to get better. And that's it. A person has that as a basis. I can work with just about anybody as well as if they've got good relational skills. No matter what kind of situation, I've worked where I've had to go in and take companies that were losing money and I've turned them around and made them profitable. Taking companies that were the most profitable in the organization and made them 40% more profitable. So I've taken companies that have been good and made them great, and I've taken companies that were doing terrible and made them profitable. So I've worked in a lot of different type of situations where I can come in and do some analysis. I've done a lot of consulting over the years. And part of my job where we'd go in and do what we call a feasibility study, where we do an analysis of our organization, everywhere from safety to HR, to their maintenance, to their productivity, to the way they supply chain. So we looked at it from top to bottom and scored them. And so I've had a lot of experience of going in and getting a feel of what's working and what's not working. And a lot of times people just need somebody from the outside to come in and coach them a little bit and show them because they're so busy. Like we said, in the fireman role, they don't have time to step back and become proactive. So sometimes they need somebody to just come alongside them and help them move from reactive to proactive, put some things, some systems, some processes in place, fix some things that aren't working so they can get back up and running at full speed again.
Was it challenging for you to go from being an employee to being the CEO of your own company?
Yes, because my mindset has been in that corporate world
Yes.
for 35 years. And so I would tell you, for people that are in your audience and maybe they're contemplating that or maybe they're going through it, it's probably the biggest challenge that I've had is the mindset shift, because you've already went into something that had structure. It already had a business model. It already had customers. Now I've worked for one situation where it was smaller and it was more of a startup, but it still already had substantial amount of business in place. It had the HR stuff in place. It had all the different things in place. And so all you're trying to do is go in and contribute and make it better. You're not trying to get the airplane off the ground. And so that's the situation I'm in right now, is trying to learn how to shift my mind from being a team member to being someone who's going out and initiating 100% of everything. And I'm experimenting. A guy that I'm part of his mastermind is Jonathan Milliken, and he talks about you go out and you do a lot of experiments. You try different things. You try guest podcasting. You try a YouTube channel. You try networking through LinkedIn. You try maybe speaking at events. So you experiment. Maybe that's not the kind of work that you're in, but maybe like this balloon twister that you had on. What did he say? He said he's an engineer, so he used his engineering background to develop his own equipment to do the balloon. He took courses, he went to conferences, and he learned a new avenue to make himself viable in that space. And so maybe you're going to make a shift, and it's going to require you to go back to school, so to speak, whether it's quilting or whether it's refereeing youth sports leagues, or maybe you're going to get into some kind of craft or hobby and it turns in. I have a friend of mine that's a pastor has become a master woodworker, and he could work full time if he wanted to, making tables. He makes these ornate coffee tables and conference tables, and they're just beautiful, custom made to your specs. So there's all different kinds of ways that a person can shift. But to me, it all starts in your mindset. How can you make that shift in your mind? So that's been the hardest thing for me.
My friend Steve Supernaut, who is the GE engineer turned balloon tire, is going to love all the promotion you've given to him. So thank you very much.
I love his story.
He is very passionate about what he's doing now, and he's always been that kind of guy. Whatever he's doing, he's been in it full 100%. And he's just enjoying a fabulous retirement, if you can call that, by doing these new things. If you could turn the clock back, is there anything you'd do differently?
That's a great question. I guess the one thing that I would think about is how could I have captured more of the things that I was learning along the way
in a catalog where you could recall them.
Yeah, I have some of it, but it's a lot like when I was talking about being a fireman and being Smokey the Bear. There were a lot of situations I went into. I was the fireman at the beginning, trying to shift it over to Smokey the Bear. And there was a lot of things I learned through those processes, and I can recall some of them. But I really ChatGPT, where I could have just at the end of every day say, "Hey, take a note on this," and just captured my thoughts, because I could probably write 5 or 6 books just from that content alone if I could recall it all. So I think one of the things that, and John Maxwell talks a lot about this, and there's some others that talk about this, is being reflective. And Michael Hyatt is really good in his book, Free to Focus. He talks about taking time to reflect on your accomplishments, your struggles, your failures, and take the lessons away from those things, whether it's through journaling or some other way that you capture those, so that you don't lose those lessons along the way and you enjoy the moment a little bit more, so to speak. And so I would say I would want to be more reflective in the moment. I'm being more reflective now, or after I went through those different seasons, but being more reflective in the moment and capturing those learning moments in a more declarative way. Just like you mentioned earlier about, you've read all these books and you've got all this information. It's hard to capture all of it. And that's the way I feel about my career. I've got all this information that I've had over the years. And if I'd have been more reflective and captured that in a more systematic way, it would have been more beneficial to me, I think.
That's a very good point. Have you written a book yourself, or do you have plans to do?
No, I've got about 5 different ones I want to write. And so I've outlined a couple of them, and I'm starting to learn that process. There's a guy that I mentioned to you earlier, Jonathan Milligan. He's got a book writing process, and I'm working to learn through that process. So that's something that I would like to get done. I'm trying to get this other plan off the ground, and writing a book's pretty all-consuming. But one of the things I'm trying to do is the content I'm putting out in my blog, I'm trying to be strategic about that, because I want to pull a lot of that content and use that as the basis for a lot of the chapters in the book. So I'm trying to do double duty there, get some of that written in a base form, and then ChatGPT or some other writing apps, AI can help take that information and help me organize it in a book form. So I'm going to use some of my previous content, try to pull that together with some of the tools that are out there today.
Do you have any advice for people over 50 who might be struggling with how to bring more purpose or meaning to their lives?
I'd go back to kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of this call about, and I would challenge them just go read that book, The Laws of Lifetime Growth by Dan Sullivan. Because if you reframe whatever point you are in life, one of your listeners and one of your guests talked about that he was being mentored by a guy that's 89 years old who's running the kitchen ministry in his local church. So he takes the excuses away for all of us.
That's right.
Because he's out there making his life, he's mentoring a person, he's serving and running a ministry at the church. He makes the coffee every week at the church. So he's making his future bigger than his past. And if you can reflect on that statement for a while and you think about what that really means, if you really implement that first law that they talk about in that book, it will change the way that you look at your life. One of the things that he mentions in the book, if you frame your life in that way, every opportunity that comes in before you, whether it's a challenge, it could be a health challenge, it could be a relationship challenge. If you look at that opportunity as a learning opportunity, then it reframes it. My good friend Dan Miller, who passed away a year ago, he always said this when a challenge came your way. He says, ask this question, and this has been life-changing for me. What does this make possible? When you're hit with something unexpected, a challenge, what does this make possible? It changes the way your brain functions in that situation. It changes the way you seek out solutions. It changes your attitude. It changes you going from being a victim to being proactive solution finder. And so if you'll ask that question, something hits you. Maybe you're in a season right now where things just aren't going right. Sit down and think, what does this make possible? Because if something's been eliminated from your life, it opens up the door for something new to come in. What is that new thing that can come in? What is that new opportunity that you can embrace where you go out and add value to people? One of my favorite statements from John Maxwell is, you have to value people to add value to them. If you'll get focused on adding value to other people, it'll move you out of that victim mentality and take you to a proactive, solution-oriented lifestyle where you're adding value to people, and good things will come out of that.
That's some of the best advice I've heard from somebody I've interviewed, is how to, or what does this make possible? Because most senior citizens have situations where their health is changing, their career has changed, they might have lost a job that they loved, or whatever the case might be. And so rather than dwelling on that and having that pity party, but reframing that as to what does this make possible, I think that is outstanding advice for anybody to follow, especially people over 50.
You had a guest recently that talked about his son that had cystic fibrosis. They were looking, he was having health challenges and his lung capacity, I think, went down to 13%. And so they started thinking about what they do. What does this make possible? They came up with a way for him to start doing some ministry coaching online. And then out of that grew into this whole new ministry that they got, that now, from what I understand, the way I understood the call, is global. It started from a situation where he was limited and he was in different states from his father with Zoom that we're on here today. He was able to open up a whole new way of living and adding value and contributing to the church world that they're serving. They did that. They are a great example. If you haven't listened to that episode, you can maybe reference it in the notes. But that's somebody that asked that question, what does this make possible? And if you'll ask that question, it'll open doors that you've never thought about before.
That was Pastor Ray Haas, and it was just a couple of episodes ago, I think in April of 2025. Super. How can people connect with you if they would like to follow you, subscribe to your newsletter, or take advantage of this drift? What is it?
Detector.
Drift detector survey. See, can't read my own writing. I'll need AI to help me.
Yes, I have a few things. If you go to markjcundiff.com, you can do all of those things. You can subscribe to my newsletter up in the right-hand corner, and that I put that out every week. It's about 5 to 10 minutes of just quick leadership advice, personal development advice. I also have on my website there a leadership reading guide that has 12 books that I recommend for 2025. It's a free downloadable book. And then the drift detector is just a little assessment. It can give you a check. And then there's a place in there where you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me by email at mark@markjcundiff.com if you want to reach out to me directly, and I'll be glad to respond to any inquiries. But my website's kind of all inclusive there. You can go there and reach out to me and learn. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn. I post every day on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with your listeners on LinkedIn, and we can have a conversation on there as well. Very active on there. I'll post at least once a day on there. And those are a lot of leadership, personal development type posts, and just try to encourage people and give them insights into things that I've been reading or listening to help them grow in their leadership and personal lives.
Are you active with other social media as well, like Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing? Or do you focus only on LinkedIn?
I am on Facebook. You can reach out to me on Facebook. Me and you are connected there. I'm on Twitter and now I'm on Instagram. I'm probably the most active on Facebook and LinkedIn. And a lot of my community is there. I have a newsletter. It mirrors a lot what I do on my website, but I also have a newsletter there that 2,500 folks responding to on LinkedIn as well.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for sharing this story with me today. You've offered a wealth of golden nuggets of great advice and information that can apply to people over 50. So I appreciate you doing that, and I wish you the best of luck going forward.
Thanks, Greg. Let's stay in touch, man. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really enjoying your podcast. It's exciting, the variety of different people from different fields that you have, and it's a great learning opportunity for me to listen to you and your audience.
Thank you. I appreciate the plug. Mark Cundiff's Life After 50 is a masterclass in intentional reinvention. As someone who averaged reading a book a week for nearly 3 decades, Mark's devotion to personal development has created a deep reservoir of knowledge that he's now using to serve others in meaningful ways. Now in his 60s, Mark is focused on helping individuals and organizations move from reactive firefighting to proactive leadership. He describes it as shifting from the fireman mentality, which is constantly addressing immediate problems, to becoming a Smokey the Bear type leader who prevents issues through careful planning and strong systems. That idea alone reframes what good leadership should look like, especially in today's fast-moving, relationship-driven work environments. Through his business, Mark works with leaders who have hit a plateau and still want to grow. He especially enjoys coaching people who are promoted into management roles but were never properly trained or mentored. That's a major leadership blind spot for many companies, Mark noted, and one that often causes good people to fail unnecessarily. Mark's advice to aspiring leaders is to cultivate a growth mindset and surround themselves with the right resources. He pointed to several books that have helped him, including The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership and Bringing Out the Best in People. The Laws of Lifetime Growth by Dan Sullivan had a particularly profound impact on his outlook after turning 50. To help people assess whether they're stuck in a reactive rut, Mark created a free tool called the Drift Detector, which is available on his website. The 7-question quiz helps people identify whether they're moving with purpose or just going through the motions. He also curates a weekly newsletter packed with leadership lessons, book recommendations, and tips that can be consumed in under 10 minutes. One of Mark's favorite questions to ask people, especially when they are facing challenges, is what does this make possible? It's a mindset-shifting prompt that encourages people to turn adversity into opportunity. In addition to coaching and consulting, Mark is building a YouTube presence, planning a podcast, and considering writing 1 or more books based on the content he's been blogging about for years. He is even exploring fractional leadership roles with smaller companies that need high-level operations guidance without hiring a full-time executive. For Mark, this stage in life is an opportunity to fully embrace his passion for helping others to unlock their leadership potential, especially those over 50 who are still eager to learn, grow, and contribute. To learn more about Mark or to take his Drift Detector assessment, visit www.markjcundiff.com. You can also connect with him on LinkedIn or subscribe to his newsletter for weekly insights into personal and professional growth. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which is available at www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thank you for listening, and if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.